Hello, everyone, and welcome to not just another episode of Lords of Limited, but we've got the Lost Caverns of Ixalan Crash Course. My name is Ben Warney, and joining me on the line, as always, Mr. Ethan thinks he's high on craft sacks. Ethan, I believe all of my craft grades are much higher than yours. I am stoked about crafting.
I am stoked about craft. I was trying to temper my, we'll get into some of these cards. I was trying to temper my grade of some of these this is, at the end of the day, this is just 2 mana cantrip and then 6 mana 6/6. Let's not get so overblown, but I love all the craft cards.
Yeah, I am pretty stoked about craft. Is it too early? I want to come in hot and call this a GOAT format already. I love this format just from the looks of the cards.
Yeah, I'm not quite ready to call it a GOAT format without drafting it one time, but I respect the stance you're taking here. I do think, looking at all the mechanics, Discover aside, though I do think Discover will be an interesting mechanic to assess. I think people are going to come in with different evaluations of Discover. Some are going to be, I think, too high on it. I think some are going to be because I think what happens in your brain when you read Discover 4 is you go, well, I get a 4-drop.
No, you get a 2, a 3, or a 4-drop, but I mean, it's still excellent on a card, right? The Discover cards that are good cards on their own are great, and the ones that are
There you go.
3 creatures can't block Discover 4, that's not great, right?
Right, but I think some people are going to evaluate cards in that space differently. Personally, I wouldn't expect everyone to feel the same about that. I think there's a lot of people who are going to be tricked into being like, but you get a card too. It's like, yeah, but you're also paying 5 mana to raise dead something. So I think there'll be some different assessments. But aside from that, craft just seems awesome. I'm excited about Descend. I love Explore. I have a lot of fondness for Ixalan.
Well, and there's just so much bleed between the
Yeah.
mechanics. There's pieces of each mechanic that touches pieces of all the other mechanics. And boy, howdy, to borrow an Ethan Sachs phrase, treasure is just stewing at the center of it all.
Yeah.
Love treasure in this format.
Love it, love it, love it. Okay, so like any kind of hipster restaurant, if you've never dined with us before, we do things a little differently around here for preview season. So we will not be doing a full card by card set review for our crash course, though we have graded all the cards separately in a spreadsheet that'll be available to you when you download the show. How we're going to do things here is first zoom out, look at some big picture stuff. How do creatures line up against removal? How supported are some mechanics? What are some support for some general themes that we see in Limited, like fixing, sweepers, life gains, things that often affect the overall landscape? Then we'll talk about the grading scale and get into all of the card differences where we've graded cards. And as Ben pointed out to me, we have quite a few highlighted cards this time around. But then we'll get to our ranked top commons and uncommons, 3 of the former and 2 of the latter. And I actually think I was expecting there to be not as much lined up in those areas. We're a little bit more lined up than I would have expected, looking at all the grading disagreements.
I agree. I was a little disappointed when I flipped over your top commons and uncommons.
Yeah. So before we get into all of that good stuff, and it will be good stuff, we do have some housekeeping things to take care of. First things first is the Patreon page. Patreon.com/Lords of Limited is where folks can go to give back to the show if they so choose. The show will always be free, but we have some excellent perks over at the Patreon page, starting with the base level. Everybody who gives back via the Patreon gets access to our Discord. The Lords of Limited Discord is awesome. We've got a nice new little MTG news section that'll be popping out, letting people know that, Ben, Khans of Tarkir coming to Arena in just over a month.
I know, I saw that. This format looks so cool, and it's going to be overlapped by that, which is also going to be awesome. I guess, too much of a good thing.
Yeah, hot on the heels of this set releasing will be a flashback to what many consider to be the GOAT limited format. I'm not one of them, but I'm excited to return to the land of duels and tries and morph and all that good stuff. But we've got a lot of great stuff happening in the Discord. I would say chief among them now would be people pouring over previews, sharing their tier lists, doing some practice drafts organized in the Discord in preparation for pre-release next weekend. So as you move up the reward tier ranks, you get access to other great stuff, and we won't go over that this time. We'll just let the people joining the Patreon speak for themselves. We are shouting out some new patrons this week. We are welcoming Michael, Brian, Mike, Jack, Leo, Carlo, Jaron, Siri, Thomas, Kyle, Gabriel, Brain, Edward, and Ty. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We really appreciate your support.
Yeah, cannot say thank you enough. Those folks know what's up. They're getting in on the Discord at the start of a new format, and you should be as well. Show is also brought to you by Cool Stuff Inc., coolstuffinc.com, where they've got cool stuff in stock. And right now, that cool stuff is Lost Caverns of Ixalan pre-orders. This is the last of the real draft sets. This is it. The last time we get 15 card boosters, so you better lock up that booster box now, store it in the closet for a rainy day after play boosters have ruined everything, and you're a little nostalgic for that old 15 card draft booster. Also, I mean, truly, honestly, this format does look great to me. I mean, obviously, tongue in cheek with the GOAT thing. I got to get my takes in early. Just want to get it in there before anyone even plays with the cards. But this does look super sweet, and I'm excited. So pre-order your box of Lost Caverns of Ixalan. And when you do, make sure you use code LOL all caps to get 5% off your order.
All right, stats, baby. So first things first, is we looked at what number/percentage does specific removal hit of the 104 creatures that exist at common or uncommon, and except for the sweepers, when we get to that section of the crash course, except for that category, we will be dealing exclusively with commons and uncommons, because that's what we do here in Limited. And we're not counting, there are 7 craft cards in that category that transform into creatures, not counting those here among the toughness. So looking at 1 toughness, it's quite a departure from Wilds of Eldraine, going from Rad Out, Flick a Coin, even Shrouded Shepherd's Adventure. We got like nothing, basically. There's just 1 removal spell here that targets specific X1s, and it's not particularly main deckable if history is going to repeat itself. We have Tectonic Hazard, single red for a sorcery, deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature they control. This is generally relegated to the sideboard, right?
Yeah, I would imagine this is not going to be a player in the Limited format. So 1 toughness creatures are safe.
Yeah, and there's 22 of them with toughness 1, so that's 21% of the creatures, 1 in 5.
Moving on to X2s, we have several removal spells that'll hit X2s. First up is Deadweight, black for an enchantment. Enchanted creature gets -2/-2. We've also got Idol of the Deep King, 2 and a red for an artifact with flash. When it ETBs, it deals 2 damage to any target. And then you can craft it by paying 2 and a red with another artifact to turn it into an equipment that gives a creature +2/+0. That part not so relevant for the killing of 2s.
That's right. And lastly, this Triumphant Chomp, single red for a sorcery. It deals damage to target creature equal to 2 or the greatest power among dinosaurs you control, whichever is greater.
Probably dinosaurs you control if you're red-green. That is a premium removal spell. So there's 29 creatures with toughness 2, which is 49% of the overall creatures.
Moving on to X3s, we've got an oldie, but boy is it a goodie. A Braid is back. 1 on a red for an instant. Choose 1. It deals 3 damage to target creature or destroy target artifact. There are 23 creatures with toughness 3, which brings us up to 72% total.
X4s, we've got Cosmium Blast. This is 1 and a white for an instant, deals 4 damage to target attacking or blocking creature. There are 16 creatures with toughness 4, which is 87% of the creatures in total.
And then moving on to X5s, there's actually 2. One is Spring-Loaded Saw Blades. We talked about this last week. It's 1 and a white for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 5 damage to target tapped creature and opponent controls. And then it's a craft artifact as well. Crafts with artifact, flips into a 5/5 vehicle. But the relevant part here is that it's a 2-mana deal 5.
We've also got Join the Dead, 1 black for an instant. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn. And if you've got Descend 4 online, it gets -10/-10 instead.
So that's 9 creatures with toughness 5, brings us up to 95%. So almost everything. There's only 5 creatures with greater than 5 toughness. So these numbers, these percents, are about what we would expect. Like, about half the creatures having 2 toughness, getting up to about 3/4 with 3 toughness. The thing that is shocking here was there's twofold. One is that we often have way more removal spells to talk about that deal with specific 3 toughness, right? Usually black has like something that deals with like 2, maybe then power 3, then maybe a catch-all. Red will have a deal 2, a deal 3, a deal 5, something like that. Not really the case here. And then the other thing is that there's much more interaction at common than uncommon this time around. 12 common removal spells versus 6. As we said, no real X1 hate. There's no real restrictive removal. Oftentimes we'll look at something else like, does it have mana value 3 or less, or 2 or less, or power 4 or greater? There isn't any of that, as far as I could tell. There's lots of blue quote unquote interaction, but almost none of it is true removal. There's 3 counter spells, 2 aura based removal spells, and 1 bounce spell, but none of them true blue. No pun intended. True blue removal in in my estimation. And white has a whopping 5 removal spells, which is more than usual.
Right, we didn't get into things that are going to hit anything. White's got an arrest variant where creature
Mm-hmm.
can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. There's also one other one we didn't shout out in red, the 3 in a red, deal damage equal to the number of lands you control at 4 mana. So that's going to hit 4 toughness or greater, depending on as you hit land drops.
Oh yes, thank you. Rumbling Rock Slide. Yes, yes, yes. I forgot about that one. Green has its usual bite at common, fight at uncommon. There's a 6 mana with cycling 2, clunky, colorless removal spell that's back. Always interesting, and I'm always thankful when I get into my shenanigans in week 4 or week 5 to have some colorless garbage removal floating around. Some stuff that we didn't count in the spreadsheet. So again, where you download the episode, you can check out our grading spreadsheet. There'll be a tab there where we've listed all the removal spells at common or uncommon. Some things I didn't count as removal. There's an edict, Ben, or is this shocking and appalling to you that this is not counted as removal?
No, I respect not counting as removal. I'm just obsessed with Tithing Blade. So this
Yeah.
is 1 and a black for an artifact. ETBs, each opponent sacrifices a creature, and then you can craft with creature for 4 and a black to get an artifact that says at the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 1 life and you gain 1 life. I am obsessed with this card.
I can't tell if this card is going to be completely overrated or completely underrated. It's definitely not going to be properly rated.
It's going to be overrated by me for sure.
There's also a Transmogrify variant back here. There's Zoyoa's Justice, 1 in a red for an instant. The owner of target artifact or creature with mana value 1 or greater shuffles it into their library. Then that player discovers X, where X is its mana value. I mean, technically interaction, but I do not think that this will be particularly playable in limited.
And then we've also got a naturalize effect in Over the Edge, 1 and a green for a sorcery. Choose 1, destroy target artifact or enchantment, or target creature you control explores, then it explores again.
And like artifacts is a theme here. There's enchantment based removal. And like explore is a thing. So it's possible that Over the Edge will be playable enough. I don't know, but I didn't end up counting it in that spreadsheet. So that's what we got to say about removal and creature sizing. We'll take a quick ad break and we'll be back with the new and returning mechanics.
All right, we're back with the new and returning mechanics. First up, we've got Descend, which is, I think, largely one of 2 main headliners for the format with Descend and Craft. So there are 19 cards with Descend or Descended, which mean kind of different things. And they're spread across a lot of colors, mostly concentrated in the Sultai colors, I think, specifically if you're talking about Descend 4 or Descend 8, which cares about you getting 4 permanents in your graveyard for Descend 4 or 8 permanents in your graveyard for Descend 8. But even before we get into any of that, I just want to talk about the various ways there are to trigger Descend or Descended, which cares about if you descended, something went to your graveyard from anywhere that turn.
Okay, so there's a lot of ways to do this in the format.
Yeah, I think so. First of which is a passion of yours. There are many sacrifice outlets running around. That's kind of a theme in white-black. Obviously, just your creatures dying in combat. There's also a variety of cards that let you mill. That's going to let you go straight from the top of your library to the graveyard. Cycling is going to let you do it at instant speed. Cycling will let you trigger Descend 4 or Descend 8 at instant speed. Looting, if it's an instant speed loot, will let you trigger it at instant speed. I think there's going to be a lot of shenanigans going on. Like once you're on Descend 3 and you have some of those Descend 4 creatures, like it's going to be tough to know what to do because you're going to get owned if your opponent can descend at instant speed.
Yeah, I'm very excited about Descent. I think it's going to be, I think Descend 4 and Descend 8 sort of that I'm less sure is how often is that mini game going to happen? But when it does, I think it'll be sweet.
Yeah. And then there's 8 cards that mill as far as, ways to get Descend online again, mostly concentrated in blue, black, 4 black, 3 blue, and then 1 green card. And the Sultai colors, so red, black is the color pair that cares about descending, like it happening during your turn. And then those Sultai color pairs, green, black, blue, black, those are the one that care about you getting permanents in your graveyard with Descend 4 and Descend 8.
Sweet.
And then we've got a few cards that just let you put cards in the graveyard. We talked about some of those last week, the Confounding Riddle that lets you counter a spell, or look for a card and dump the rest in your graveyard. So there's going to be ways to turn on Descend, I think, quite reliably. It's also just naturally going to happen over the course of the game, like hitting Descend 4 and Descend 8 as you trade off resources with your opponents. And the cards that have Descend 4, Descend 8, generally good payoffs, I think.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Another, yeah, you shouted this out earlier as a way for that I might like to get to descend, which is sacrificing. Unfortunately, I don't think sacrifice seems super well supported. I mean, it's clearly what black white is trying to do, but we're sort of missing. There is sacrifice fodder for sure, and there are sacrifice outlets for sure, but we're missing that sort of key third piece. That's like when a creature dies, do this, and I guess maybe fueling descend or whatever. Like I think it'll just more be about those synergies between, okay, I like play my 2 mana 1/1, exile a card from your hand, and now I have a way to use that later on in the game, that type of deal.
Right. So descending is kind of the payoff for
Yeah.
sacrificing something during your turn. So there are a couple cards here. The first of those is Ruin Lurker Bat, which is white for a 1/1 flying lifelink. And at the beginning of your end step, if you descended, scry 1. I think that's going to be outstanding in white black. Just a good card in general, but really will be at home in white black. And the second of them is a build around enchantment that may or may not get there, probably not, but I think its best home certainly will be white black if it does get there at all. This is Canonized in Blood, 1 and a black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control, and then you can pay 7 mana to sacrifice this enchantment to make a 4/3 white black vampire demon creature token with flying.
It's a lot of text for unplayable, wouldn't you say?
It's not unplayable.
Oh.
It'll be playable in a black white sacrifice deck, I think, but not a great card there.
We'll chat about that in a few in a few moments.
But yeah, so we've got those sacrifice outlets. The premium one is the Bartolome del Presidio. That's the white black uncommon signpost. It's white black for a 2/1. You can sack a creature and artifact to put a +1/+1 counter on it. And then there are just a ton of things that are set up to be sacrifice fodder for craft or for this white black sacrifice deck. So you are, I think, going to have no trouble finding sacrifice fodder for your sack outlets. But again, there's just not real payoffs other than combining sack outlets and payoffs for small bonuses or extra pieces of cardboard.
There's a smattering of artifact matters stuff, whether they're entering the battlefield, that's more blue red, whether you want them sticking around to be able to tap to get bonuses for red white. I wouldn't say that either of these are heavily supported. I think these are going to be, would you say, just largely like sort of like how we thought about red white in Woe was like celebration happens, but you're not putting bad enablers in your deck. Like you care about celebration, but you're not putting the bad enablers in your deck. Would you say the same's likely true for this tap theme in Boros?
I think so. Mostly it just that it doesn't have much overlap. We talked about how much bleed there are between the major mechanics. This one seems pretty self-contained, but again, treasure glue that's tying the room together here because treasure is going to give you a free artifact to tap, and most of these want you to tap 2 things. So once you have 2 treasure, like they're just powering up all of these cards fairly significantly. I think once I've seen some of the payoffs, I think this is going to be a very streamlined deck, but I do think it will get there if you get all the things. So we haven't seen this signpost uncommon yet. This is 2 red white for a 4/4 human soldier, and whenever it attacks, this is named Caparakti Sunborn. Whenever it attacks, you can tap 2 untapped artifacts or creatures you control. If you do, discover 3. I mean, that could snowball in a hurry if you're meeting the requirements for that.
Yeah, I mean, this doesn't do the thing where like it comes into play, but it basically threatens like you better have a way to either, I mean, even not even like you're still going to get the value even if you trade with it in combat. It sort of demands, it's big enough that it demands to be answered.
Right. And there's another really strong one, I think, in Guardian of the Great Door. This is white, white for a 4/4 flyer. As an
Yeah.
additional cost to cast this spell, tap 4 untapped artifact creatures and or lands you control. So basically, red, white is going to be trying to flood the board, as per usual, to try to get the opponent dead. But there's also going to be ways to, turn those rectangles into bonuses with this theme of tapping artifacts or creatures to power up stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I saw someone on Twitter be like, this is just like 6 mana, convoke, improvise. And I was like, oh, yeah, that is just what it is. That's pretty
Yeah,
good.
quite strong, yes.
Yeah.
So next up, we've got blue-red, which is artifacts, ETBing. There's only really 2 cards that have this text, the blue-red signpost uncommon, and another artifact that I think we're going to be arguing about later in Dowsing Device.
Mm-hmm.
But we saw this last week, the Captain Storm Cosmium Raider, blue-red for a 2/2. When an artifact ETBs, put a +1/+1 counter on target pirate you control. So again, this doesn't look super supported, but there's a couple other cards that care about you controlling an artifact. And Craft is obviously in blue-red, and Craft is great. So I feel very confident that blue-red's going to be a deck, despite not many cards having this specific text of artifacts entering the battlefield on them.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. But like Yeah, blue red is a deck I'm very excited to play. Maybe even more so for the craft of it all. But like, I think that it looks really good.
Yeah. Next up, we've got dinosaurs, which is red green. There are 20 dinosaurs in the set, 15 of which are red green. That's a common and uncommon. This looks super supported, lots of good payoffs, lots of high card quality. First payoff we've got here is Eatskinth, Firstborn of Gishath. What's going on there?
This is red green for a 2/3 legendary dino with haste. When Eatskinth, Firstborn of Gishath, enters the battlefield, you can pay 2. When you do, target dino you control deals damage equal to its power to another target creature. This card's awesome. Scales with the game. 2 mana, 2/3 haste is great. 4 mana, 2/3 haste, deal 2 to something is great. 4 mana, haste, 2/3, deal more to something is great. Just awesome.
Next up is Earthshaker Dreadmaw, 4 GG for a 6/6 trample. When it ETBs, you draw a card for each other dinosaur you control.
There's Triumphant Chomp. We shouted that out earlier as the single red sorcery. Deal 2 or deal damage equal to the greatest power among dinos you control. It's just a pretty clear, like, things that care about dinos and things that are dinos.
But they're all really well statted. Like, they're just
Yeah,
good cards. Like, this is going to be a strong beatdown deck in the format,
yes.
I think.
Yeah, I
Like,
think
when you're crafting, you're going to be hoping to not die to dinosaurs running you over.
yes, I think I think they tweaked the knobs just right. It looks like there's not a lot of clunky looking, like, I don't know, 3 mana 4/2 things that you're just like not really interested in.
Right. Next up, we've got Explore, which is concentrated in blue-green. There's 15 cards that explore in the format, and most of those are in blue and green. And payoffs for exploring, there's a few, but first and foremost, if you haven't played with Explore yet, any creature, especially if it's cheap, that says Explore on it is just premium and its
Yep.
own payoff.
Yep, totally agree. I think that's important to shout out. Like, Explore's good, map tokens by proxy are then good. Craft is largely good. Discover is obviously excellent. Like, these last few mechanics we have here, they're all just inherently powerful. You don't need to like build an explore deck. You don't need to build a craft deck. Like, these cards are just strong.
Yes, just good limited mechanics. So we've got the blue-green signpost uncommon here, which is Nikanzeal, Current Conductor. Blue-green for a 2/3 legendary Merfolk Scout. Whenever a creature you control explores a land card, you may put a land card from your hand onto the battlefield tapped. And whenever a creature you control explores a non-land card, put a +1/+1 counter on Nikanzeal, Current Conductor.
We chatted about a couple other of these payoffs, Twists and Turns and Explorer's Cache last week. Twists and Turns is that single mana enchantment that when you explore, you scry 1 first, and then you explore, and it also explores when it ATBs. And Explorer's Cache is the thing that comes into play with some +1/+1 counters, and you can move them around.
Yeah, I kind of like Explorer's Cache quite a bit more after seeing how many Explore cards there are and just kind of putting together with the Explore, getting counters on your creatures. It's kind of like an anthem for your team with Explorer's Cache. I'm pretty high on this.
Wow. Okay. Anthem for your team has been announced.
Gotta get those takes in there.
I'm not sure how that. I'm reading the card and I'm not saying anthem, but you know.
Well, so let's talk about it. So
Okay.
it's 1 and a green, ETBs with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. And whenever a creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it dies, put a +1/+1 counter on Explorer's Cache. You can tap to move a counter from this onto a creature at sorcery speed. So the turn you play this, you'll be able to put a +1/+1 counter on something. The next turn, like, you don't often have more than 2 or 3 creatures on the battlefield. And then let's say you've explored with something. This is just gonna be keeping your creatures 1 power and toughness larger most of the game.
Yeah, it's like a very slow, clunky Ozlith.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah, it's great. Only 5 cards that make map tokens. They're mostly in blue. Waterwind Scout is the best of them. We'll talk about that when we get to the top blue commons. We'll have plenty of praise for the Scout. I thought I was high on craft until I met Ben Werney. I'm not high enough apparently, but I am obsessed with all of the craft cards in this format.
Yeah, there's 15 cards at craft, mostly in blue-white, but every color gets some. And this is super supported in the sense that, as we talked about, craft is just a premium limited mechanic. It's going to play very well with other mechanics that are going on in the set. Super high on craft.
Yep. And then lastly, Discover. There's like that one payoff, quote unquote payoff. Like, Discover is just insane. You just get a free card. Now, it's insane when, as Ben said, the initial thing you're getting
It's playable.
is like at rate. Like the 4 mana 3/2 is like, that's like slightly understated, but then you're discovering, was it 3? Discover 4 on
Discover
that card?
3, I think, yeah.
So you're just like, yeah, I'm getting something slightly below rate, but then I'm definitely getting something in addition. So it's above rate. Like, you want to be able to calibrate that way, but they're just excellent. It's just a really, really powerful mechanic.
But Discover 4 and 5 is not that much better than Discover
Correct.
3 and 2. That's important to realize also.
Right. That you're likely hitting a two. You're like the most likely to hit a 2-drop, then a 3-drop probably, and then the rest is all pretty equal. Maybe
And you
1-drop.
well, and you should not be making your limited curve worse to make your Discover better.
I didn't realize that was a safety tip we needed to throw
I
out
mean,
there, but I think you're right. I think it's a good thing to
I
say.
think it's an important safety tip.
Let's take a look at sweepers. This can be a huge part of a format, like we think about White Sun's Twilight, Wandering Emperor, and Phyrexia Obi-Wan. Like sometimes these really warp a format. We have 3 mini sweepers at non-rare. We talked about one already, Tectonic Hazard, that deals 1 damage to everything your opponents control. There's also Malicious Eclipse. It's 1 black for a sorcery. All creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn, and if a creature an opponent controls would die this turn, you exile it instead. And lastly, we've got a sweet little cave build around here, giving me some Gates Ablaze flashbacks for Ravnica Legion. What's going on here?
Calamitous Cave-In. This is 3 in a red for a sorcery. Deals X damage to each creature and each planeswalker, where X is the number of caves you control, plus the number of caves card in your graveyard. I don't know whether I'm higher on caves or crafting. It's a real push-pull there.
Yeah.
I love both things.
The Caves deck looks sweet for sure. And then at rare, we've got Unstable Glyph Bridge. This is 3 white for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, if you cast it, for each player, choose a creature with power 2 or less that player controls, then destroy all creatures except creatures chosen this way. So you can choose a small thing that each player controls. They can keep that, but everything else is going bye-bye. And then it has craft for 5 mana, flips into a 5/3 flyer, other excellent text on it, just another great craft card.
Oh my god, why is that a card? That's so oppressive. Next, we've got Bringer of the Last Gift. This is 6 black for a 6/6 flying vampire demon at rare. When it ETBs, if you cast it, each player sacrifices all other creatures they control. Then each player returns all creature cards from their graveyard that weren't put there this way to the battlefield. This is significantly less good.
Yeah, and then something that I think will just be straight up good is Terror Tide. 2 black sorcery, Fathomless Descent. All creatures get -X until end of turn, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. I like this sweeper a lot because I think it's not just clearly like you get to go do nothing. Like you kind of have to build towards it, but I think you'll be able to do so in a way where you're not like at odds with yourself in terms of affecting the board to then sweep it up.
Fixing. We've got much less running around than Wilds of Eldraine. We've got treasures, first and foremost. We've got the cycle of land cyclers at common, which are 2 mana, discard a card to search up a basic of their type.
There's 3 colorless. The one I like the best is Compass Gnome. We talked about this last week. 2 mana, 2/1. When it enters the battlefield, you can search your library for a basic land card or a cave card, reveal it, then shuffle your library, and then put that card on top.
But there's others running around. I mean, if you want to fix, you'll be able to fix. There's very obviously a 5-color caves deck get into the format. Like, you're going to be able to do the thing.
I think you're going to be able to do the thing with caves. I think 5-color caves is a thing. There isn't 5-color green, though. I don't think. Like, green just has Poison Dart Frog. It doesn't have, like, any search up a basic thing. Like, think about that versus Brave the Wilds, Return from the Wilds. Like, you had a lot of ways, Root Rider Fawn, like tons of ways in green in the last set to fix. Like, it's just going to be much less. And the land cyclers cycle for 2 mana, and they don't splash themselves. All the land cyclers at common in the set are double pipped.
Well, but there's 2 colorless ways. You already shouted out Compass Gnome. There's Scampering Surveyor as well. 4 mana, 3/2 to ETB. Search your library for a basic land card or a cave card. Put it on the battlefield tapped, then shuffle. That card's excellent. I just think there's going to be ways to do it. Maybe not centered in green, but certainly looks like splashing is going to be doable if you want to splash. Or, again, 5-color caves.
Yeah.
It takes us on to incidental life gain. There are a couple repeated ways to gain some life here, first of which is Consuming Sepulcher. What's going on there?
Well, this is the backside of your favorite card, Tithing Blade. So Tithing Blade comes into play, 2 mana. They sack your creature, craft with a creature for 4 and a black, and it drains them every upkeep. They lose a life, and you gain a life.
We've also got Acolyte of Aclazotz. And that's 2 and a black for a 1/4. Sacrifice another creature artifact. Each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain a life.
And there's 5 cards that either have lifelink or can gain or grant lifelink. Shout out to Gargantuan Leech. That's the 7 and a black 5/5 with lifelink. Costs 1 less to cast for each cave you control and each cave in your graveyard.
And there are a few one-off ways here, 8, I guess, to be exact. And we want to shout out Soaring Sandwing. That's the Planecycler. 4 white for a 3/5 flyer. When it ETBs, you gain 3 life. I love that card.
Me too. Moves us on to mana sinks. These are either repeatable or incidental places to put mana. So I just want to shout out some like big overarching ways that exist, and then that there are sort of the smattering of our usual fare there otherwise. So craft, while it's not a repeatable place to put mana, it is an incidental place. Like all your craft cards, one of the reasons I'm so high on craft, and I have graded pretty harshly other expensive cards in the format, and I recognize you won't always get craft cards, but all of your craft cards are like 2 mana, then 7 mana. Like you don't need 5, 6, 7 mana plays in your deck if you're crafting, because all your craft cards are things to do higher up on that curve. There's also equipment. There's a like minor equipment theme. That's definitely a repeatable place to put mana. Map tokens, right? It costs 1 to crack the map tokens to explore. Exploring isn't like mana sinks or card advantage necessarily, but does like help you churn through some lands on the top of your library, etc. And the hidden lands, the cycle of the common caves that you can pay 4 and their respective color tap sack to discover 4. So those are 4 pretty big ways spread across, I think, basically all the colors to be able to dump mana.
Yeah, it seems very clear from looking at the previews that much like in many recent sets, it is going to be hard to run out of things to do.
Yeah. And then otherwise you got like the usual like handful of ways to pump creatures inherently, a token maker, some card draw, some repeatable explorer, etc.
But one of the defining features of OG Ixalan was that there were almost no mana sinks.
Correct.
And that seems not to be the case here at all.
Yes, I would agree.
All right. You ready to duke it out about some Magic the Gathering cards? Get the boxing gloves on?
I gotta warm up here. Put me in. Okay, we're going to be using the tried and true LR grading scale. It starts us off with A's. These are bombs, game winners, good in many situations, especially when behind. They're the best cards in the set. Your bomb rares and hyper efficient spells. Cards like Gruff Triplets, Virtue of Persistence, and Fawn's Bane Troll.
Your B's are strong cards that pull you into color or make you want to play that color, reasons to be in a particular color, or combination of colors. These are the best commons and good uncommons. Cards like Hatching Plans, Torch the Tower, Welcome to Sweet Tooth, and Tough Cookie.
Your C's are solid playables. They're the meat and potatoes of a limited deck. These are your role player creatures, normal removal spells. Cards like Voracious Vermin, Edgewall Pack, and Root Rider Fawn.
Your D's are sometimes playable below average 22nd, 23rd type cards, things like Two Veil Guide, Fell Horseman, or Verdant Outrider.
Your F's are unplayable. Cards you should never put in your deck, weird rares. Shout out to all of the Enchanting Tales, RIP.
And weird sagas like Corvold and the Noble Thief.
So in addition to putting like pluses or minuses within those grades, we'll have a couple ways to augment grades. One of them is sideboard cards. These are cards that don't make the main deck, but when you board them in, can be quite good. Cards like Disdainful Stroke or Spider Food.
We've also got build around cards, which are cards that don't do much on their own. When you build around them, can be anywhere from good to great. Things like Knight of the Sweet's Revenge, Yenna Redtooth Regent, or Hilda of the Icy Crown.
Synergy cards. These are cards that are not good enough to build around, right? You're not shaping your whole draft or deck around them, but they provide good synergy if they're in the right deck. Cards like Princess Takes Flight, Hopeless Nightmare, and Cut In.
Last category is diminishing returns cards, which are cards where the second copy is significantly worse than the first. Things like Rat Out or Back for Seconds.
All right, Ben, what do you need to do? You need to stretch out a little bit? You're just ready?
No, I am locked and loaded. See, I had the advantage of grading the cards second, so I got to see my grades compared to yours right away. The old brain was ticking last night while I was deliriously entering grades.
All right, so we're going to start off with white, and our first common to talk about is Deconstruction Hammer. Single white for an artifact equipment. Equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has 3 tap. Sack Deconstruction Hammer to destroy target artifact or enchantment, and it has an equip cost of 1. I gave this a C. You gave this a D+. I mean, isn't short sword good?
No.
I think short
No.
sword is just good.
I disagree. I mean, this is short sword with some upside. You're
Yeah.
not you're not going to be playing this in every white deck.
Yeah, maybe not. So
This
maybe
is this is going to be a red white card only because it's an artifact that you're going to be able to
you
put
can
on a
tap.
creature and then tap it to power up
Yeah.
some other things. There's not that many cards that care about that. I don't know. I'm not super into this.
I feel like short sword is good these days. Maybe I'm wrong, but I'm not budging on C. I like it.
I think we are at an impasse then, my
I
friend.
think so. I think so.
Next, we have Oteklon Landmark. This is white for an artifact. When it ETBs, you scry 2, and it's got craft with artifact for 2 and a white. Flips into Oteklon Levitator, which is 1/4 flying golem, and whenever it attacks, target attacking creature without flying gains flying until end of turn. You gave us a C. I gave us a D. This is the only craft card I'm low on. What do you like about it?
So my thought about this card is like, how do you think about this in relation to the transforming sagas? Like,
Transforming Sagas. I'm going to
so
need more to go on than that.
sorry, from Neon Dynasty, like Okiba Reckoner Raid. It was like chapter 1, drain him for 1. Chapter 2, drain him for 1. Chapter 3, it's a 2/2 menace. You know, like
Significantly worse.
this is significantly worse. But is that at all an okay like comparison to make? Like, there's not that much of an upfront cost to this, so you like pay 1 and scry 2, fine, and then dumping 3 mana to get a 1/4 later on. That seems pretty doable.
Yes, but like this card is at odds with itself. That's what I don't like about it. To me, craft is value and late game value, and this is on its face an aggressive card that you're not going to get until turn 5 or turn 6. Like I don't want any of what this card is doing, I don't think. I'm not interested in white for Scry 2 to sit around until I get an artifact to turn this into a 1/4. I think this has significant cognitive dissonance within itself as a
All right,
magic card.
I'll go down to D+. Next up, we have Glorifier of Suffering. This is 2 and a white for a 3/2 vampire soldier. When it enters the battlefield, you may sacrifice another creature or artifact. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each of up to 2 target creatures. I gave this a D. You gave this a Synergy C+. Perhaps D is too low, and this should be D+, C-. But I think this is my main issue with this is I don't see how you can cast this on curve that often. And that's a pretty big knock. Oh, sorry, how you can cast this on curve that often and get the bonus from it. That seems
Right. I
hard to
mean,
do.
the curve would be it's a white black only card, right? And the
Okay.
curve is one of the white or black 1-drops into the 2 mana black artifact that like draws you a card when ETBs or leaves, something like that, into this. But it's also going to be great on turn 5, maybe, where you're playing another 2-drop and this
Yeah.
and double spelling. Like I think this is just cheap enough and efficient enough. We've seen the creature that brings 2+1/+1 counters along with it be quite strong, and usually that creature costs 4 mana. And I think if you build your deck right, the sacrificing could be upside for you, or at least is not going to be a steep cost to pay. I think looks like a good card to me in a white-black sacrifice deck.
Okay. Yeah, I'll see it. I'll come up to Synergy C+. I like it. I'm also thinking that you can probably end up getting them fairly late.
Yes,
Like
I think it's a very niche card.
Yeah, I think that's true. Okay. Cool.
Next, we've got Guardian of the Great Door. This is white for that 4/4 flyer. As an additional cost to cast it, you tap 4 untapped artifact, creatures, or lands you control. You give us a C+. I give us build around B. I think this card is incredible. I think this is a reason to draft that white-red go wide deck. I think it's also just a good card in any white deck that's playing creatures and artifacts. Love this card.
I think it's great too. This is me trying to like temper my grades for expensive cards.
But
Like
this isn't expensive. It's cheap. It's got Convoke
it's
and
6
Improvise.
6 mana Convoke Improvise. I get it, but like that is still at the end of the day. I just am wondering, is that really truly one of the 6-drops? And yes, I know it's not really a 6-drop that I want to put in my deck. And I think yes, but I don't know if it quite pulls me in. I'm trying to temper those grades just a little bit.
I love this card.
Okay.
I think you should let it pull you in, baby. Reel it on in.
All right. Moving on to blue. First up is Relic's Roar. Single blue for an instant. Until end of turn, target artifact or creature becomes a dinosaur artifact creature with base power and toughness 4/3 in addition to its other types. I gave this a diminishing returns C, and you just basically you gave it as close to an F as you could. You gave it a D minus.
Are you ever playing this card?
I think so.
Really?
I
I
don't.
would say no. I would bet money you never put this card in your deck.
So here's the way. Here's what I'm, and maybe diminishing returns isn't actually fair for this card. Like someone like D4 or Two Duck Cubed is gonna find some deck where Relic's Roar is just like the nuts.
No, this card is hot garbage.
There's some single mana 4/3. Turn your treasure into a 4/3. Turn your craft artifact into a 4/3.
Sure,
Like
by putting a terrible card in your deck.
no, this is just maybe I kind of want to revise my grade as like synergy C plus or something. I think this is going to be a deck.
Week 6 synergy D minus.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. It's not an F, it's a week 6 synergy D minus. I'm going synergy C plus. That's what I'm doing.
Oh my god.
My grade went higher. How do you like that?
I hate it. Next up, we've got Inverted Iceberg. This is 1 and a blue for an artifact. When it ETBs, you mill a card, then draw a card. And it's got Craft with Artifact, 4 blue for a 6/6 Iceberg Titan. And whenever Iceberg Titan attacks, you may tap or untap target artifact or creature.
Yeah, I thought I was doing a solid here. I give this a C. You said B minus.
B minus. I mean, you can't claim to be high on craft and then give this card a C. This card is.
I think I can.
No, this card is incredible. This is Sauroform hybrid, except instead of a 2/2, you get the mill and draw card, but it's Sauroform hybrid that replaces itself up front. Like, you just need to not die, and this is giving you so much value. It's milling for the blue-black deck. This is at the intersection of everything that's going on in the format. This card is nutter butters.
I mean, I felt all of those things. I was going to grade this highly, and then I was trying to like really think about the case of this is just at the end of the day, it's just 2 mana, draw a card, mill a card, which is all good. And then it doesn't affect the board though until much later.
Until it turns into a 6/6 and has 2 for 1 your opponent and is a massive threat.
How is it 2 for 1 them?
Because it draws a card when it ETBs.
Yeah.
This card is so strong. Let your emotions guide your card evaluations, my friend.
I'll go C plus, but I'm a little nervous about it.
No.
Okay.
Card's wonderful.
Next up is Oaken Siren. This is 1 and a blue for a 1/2 artifact creature that's flying in vigilance. And you can tap to add blue, spend this mana only to cast an artifact spell or activate an ability of an artifact source. I gave this a synergy C plus. You gave this a D plus. This is great for the artifact decks.
Yeah.
Mana Sink for craft. This card's good. And Flying Vigilance, meaning you can peck in and then cast something post-combat. This is a good version of this effect.
But your craft decks don't care about getting in for 1 damage. Your craft decks are going to win the game in the late game, I think.
I mean, it's still a body that then it holds off 1/1s or whatever. Like, you can't knock this for being able to attack. That's not a downside.
Well, a mana rock you might almost be more interested in a mana rock in those decks that's not vulnerable to removal. I mean,
because this card might get a deadweight out of your opponent's hand. You cannot be describing these upsides as downsides. Your opponent might want to kill this. Like, okay.
We're in debate class right now. Hell yeah, I can. I mean, win the argument.
Sure, it's just not, your arguments are bad right now. I think this is going to be good in the artifact decks. I think blue-white and blue-red are going to want this.
I agree. I'll go Synergy C.
Great. All right, next up is Frilled Cave Worm. 3 and a blue for a 2/5. And it has Descend 4. It gets +2/+0. I gave this a D. You gave this a C minus.
I originally gave this a C plus. Then I saw your D and I moved it down to C minus. I like this card. I think 4 mana 2/5 we've seen has been a very annoying card to play against, like to try to attack into. And then this is naturally going to turn into a 4 mana 4/5 over the course of a longer game. I don't think this card is going to be a high pick, but I think it is going to be, you're going to be happy to put this in your 4-drop slot when you end up with them.
What did this is not a let me ask you this. This is just me trying to calibrate my like current approach to grading these 4 mana, 5 mana, 6 mana plays. What would your grade have been at the end of the set for Scream Puff?
Hope to not play D.
Right. But like Scream Puff, if it was in your deck, you weren't mad. Like it was good. It filled like a role at the mana value slot. But at the end of the day, you were never missing it. And that's sort of how I feel about Frilled Caveworm. I'm not saying that like this is a bad card. I'm not saying that I won't put this in decks. Just saying I don't think I'm ever gonna be like, I wish I got that Frilled Caveworm in the
I
four
agree.
drop slot.
Yeah, just a respectable card. So it probably is a D.
Yeah. Okay. Ooh. Next card. What do we got here?
I didn't change my grade here. I'm going to prematurely concede here because I didn't see it until I saw how high your grade was, and then I thought about it some more. But we've got Waterlogged Hulk. This is blue for an artifact. It taps to mill a card, and you can craft with Island for 3 and a blue, and it turns into Watertight Gondola, which is a 4/4 vigilance. To send 8, it can't be blocked as long as there are 8 or more cards in your graveyard that are permanents. And it's got a crew cost of 1. Explain to me and the people why you are right about Waterlogged Hulk.
Okay, so it's a similar idea to what I was talking about, what I was trying to talk about with the white one, and that like to get this onto the battlefield, so low cost, right? Just single blue, that's going to slot in on your curve wherever. If it's turn 1, great. Tap mill a card, also great. Going to start fueling descent or whatever. Craft with island. You mean I have to stone rain myself? No. You have milled an island along the way with Waterlogged Hulk to transform this. Then it transforms into a 4/4 vigilance crew 1. I already feel like crew 1 is pretty shallow. And then if you, I don't even think you have to get to the descend 8 unblockable part of it. Like I just think that's gravy. But 4/4 vigilance crew 1 is huge, and there are going to be times where you just want to keep using this to mill. I just think this is a great card.
It is a great card. You gave it a B. I gave it a build around D. What I was thinking initially was that this wasn't worth jumping through the hoops for, but I think the best card of this card to me that you haven't even mentioned yet is on turn 1, this is going to give you Descend 4 like on turn 4 or on turn 5. Like it's going to give you Descend so early.
Mm-hmm.
And then the times where you draw it late in the game where it would be a bad top deck, it can be your win condition. Like it's just
Yeah.
excellent at all points in the game. I was thinking it was at odds with itself and kind of not worth jumping through the hoops for. But the fact that this says if you draw it early, you always get to send without your opponent being able to really say or do anything about it. Like this card single-handedly discerning on descend quickly
Mm-hmm.
is quite strong, I think.
Yeah. And then when you want the body or the vehicle body, you get it.
Right, and then it's going to be a relevant Magic the Gathering card for the purpose of the game later.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Lodestone Needle is up next. This is a 1 and a blue for an artifact with flash. When it ETBs, tap up to 1 target artifact or creature and put 2 stun counters on it. You know I love some stun counters, Ethan.
I do.
It's also got craft with artifact, 2 and a blue. It flips into Guidestone Compass, artifact, 1 tap. Target creature you control explores, activate only as a sorcery. You gave us a C minus. I gave us a B minus. Says the person who thinks he's high on craft. I mean, this card is, again, everything I want from my craft cards. It's going to help you not die while you're derping around the late game. And then a mana sink to explore every turn, like to help make sure you're hitting land drops to be able to, again, like dump your mana into all these places while also making sure you draw action. Guidestone Compass, once you craft this, is just an incredible Magic card.
Yeah, I'm too low on this. I just don't like this front half. Like I just don't feel like either of these is worth a card. Is that crazy?
It seems crazy to me. The back half is, you would play the back half straight up if you had the option to.
One tap, target creature you control explores.
That's 1 tap. If it lands on top of your deck, you draw the land.
Yeah.
That's such a low mana investment.
All
And
right.
once you start hitting the lands, it's essentially going to be free because it's helping you hit land drops. The back half is incredible.
All right. I'm coming up
The,
to B
the front
minus.
half, I agree, is mediocre, but the front half helps you get to the back half.
Yeah, you're just dying for any excuse to play that effect, and I think you found it. That's what I think. Next up, we've got Hurl into History. It's 3 blue for an instant. Counter target artifact or creature spell. Discover X, where X is that spell's mana value. I gave this a C. You gave this a B minus.
I got my second. Let me ask you this here.
Go for it, buddy.
Are you ready for it?
Huh?
Do you like Mystic Snake?
Do I like Mystic Snake? Yeah. I think I like Mystic Snake.
This card is very close to Mystic Snake.
Yeah, it's a 5-mana counterspell. This is the thing where it's actually not Mystic Snake, and Mystic Snake is much better because at the very least, you can flash in Mystic Snake as a 4-mana 2/2. You can't do that here. This card is abysmal when you're behind, like abysmal. And I think that's why I'm just trying to be like, it's abysmal when you're behind. It costs 5 mana. I can't give this. I can't. This doesn't pull me into blue. That's how I feel.
I think this does. I think this is a reason to build a control deck where you're anticipating not being behind.
Wait, the control decks do anticipate being behind. That's their whole deal, is that they're behind.
Not good control decks. Like, you have good early interaction, you keep pace, and then you win once you're stable into the late game.
The other thing is that, like, yeah, when you're looking for Mystic Snake and you like want to affect the board, you counter something and you get another counter spell, or you find your 2-mana artifact that turns into a 6/6. Like, there are also going to be enough times where, like, you're like, man, I really wish that I had something impacting the board now, but I don't. Mystic Snake comparison is not working on me. I'm very upset that you tried to trick me with this Mystic Snake thing. I'm sticking with C. I think I see the ceiling on this card for sure, but I also see the floor.
There is a floor, but I think if you're in danger of hitting the floor, you're just not putting the card in your deck, or you're not interested in it. So maybe it's a C+, but I think the ceiling on this card is incredibly high.
Okay.
Next up, we've got Council of Echoes. This is 4 blue for a 4/4 flyer with Descend 4. When this ETBs, if there are 4 more permanent cards in your graveyard, return up to 1 target non-land permanent other than this to its owner's hand. You give us a C-, I give us a Synergy B-.
I don't think this matters.
It's good if you do the thing. It's probably not a B-. This is
never pulling you into blue. When was the last time a 6-mana 4/4 flyer pulled you into any color? And your deck is you, Mr. Kraft Macaroni, Mr. Cheezosaurus Rex. You are gonna be. You've got plenty of places to dump 6 mana.
Yeah, maybe a C+ or C. I agree.
It's not a C+. This is 2015 Ben telling you that this is a C+. Because it was 8 years ago. It's not anymore.
All right, C. Can I get a C?
You can.
This is at least a C. I'm gonna go C.
Okay.
All right, that takes us on to Black Commons. First one we've got here is Greedy Freebooter. Black for a 1/1. When this dies, scry 1 and make a treasure token. You gave us a C. I gave us a D-. Do I win?
What was that little face? For folks not watching on YouTube, Ben just like tilted his head to the side and pursed his lips a little bit. Like, your move. I gave it a D-. What do you have to say about that? I'll tell you what I have to say about this is that this, I think, is good enough. Like,
not worth a card is a D-.
No, this is definitely worth the card. So I understand that it's only half of it, but it does give you the scry 1. It's half of Shambling Ghast, right? Shambling Ghast was a 1/1. When it died, it gave something -1/-1 until end of turn, or made a treasure. This doesn't give you the choice, and you obviously were often trying to do the -1/-1 a lot, but there were definitely times where you chose to make a treasure. This trades off with X1s, which we know are, 20% of the format or whatever. Sacrifice fodder, double descend. I think this just does enough for a 1-drop.
I don't. I think I'm going into the format hoping to never play this card.
And it trades with something and then gives you craft fodder, or it's craft fodder, and then this just does enough. You're way too low on this. Maybe I'm too high on C, but I think this is above replacement.
So D+?
Above.
C-?
I think the lowest you can go is C- on this card. Yeah.
Oof. That's so, like, you're unhappy if your use of this card is sacrificing it. I think you are only happy if this manages to trade with an X1.
I think it's fair. I don't know. You're acting like scry 1 and treasure is nothing. It's not nothing.
It's not nothing, but it's not a card.
No, but
like
it's
block
all
and
three
get a
of these
scry 1
things.
And a treasure.
Yeah, but like, you're gonna have places to use these rectangles with craft, with sacrifice. It's descend. Like, it counts as descend. It just does enough for 1 mana for the low price of 1 tapped swamp.
I don't know. Maybe I've got 2015 Cardivals, but this looks real bad to me.
Next up is Wormcoil Engine. Can you believe it?
All right. Next, we've got Deathcap Marionette. This is 1 and a black for a 1/1 Death Touch. When it ETBs, you may mill 2 cards. You give us a C minus. I give us a Synergy C plus. I think this card is going to be bread and butter for decks that are trying to descend.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm trying. I wonder if you made this analogy or throwback. I think it was Sam Black at first who was talking about, that's what I remember talking about at first. In Theros Beyond Death, there was this mechanic that let you escape cards, right? So you could cast them for a mana cost and then have, some amount of fodder in your graveyard to exile. And so there was Venomous Hierophant, which is 4 mana for a 3/3 Death Touch. When ETB'd, you milled 3. And because if you had escape costs of exile 3 cards, this was basically a 2-for-1, right? It was giving you the 3 cards in your graveyard for a potential future escape. And that's how I was trying to think about mill with this descend 4, or descending, descend 4, descend 8, whatever. But at the end of the day, I felt like I had to knock this for 2 mana 1/1 Death Touch. But you're saying no, you think it's okay?
Well, especially because there's not X1 hate. Like, you're not in
Yeah.
danger of getting ratted outed or whatever. I think I like this card a lot in blue-black or black-green.
Okay, I'll come up to Synergy C plus with you.
Next up is Mephitic Draft. This is 1 and a black for an artifact. Whenever Mephitic Draft enters the battlefield or is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you draw a card and you lose 1 life. You give us a D+. I gave us a Synergy C+. Much like the former card, I think this is going to be bread and butter in sacrifice decks, in artifact decks, places that I guess crafting doesn't do the thing with this because you exile when you craft, but there's a lot going on here to like.
Yeah, this probably is unique enough in those decks that it's not. What I was thinking was like you would play it in those decks for sure, but that if you were in that deck for the right reasons, ideally, like you wouldn't miss it necessarily. Like you would have your whatever, your black 2 mana 1/1, they exile a card from their hand, and that's your sack fodder. You have other things that don't literally not impact the board other than cantripping. But I bet there will be times where you end the draft and you're like, I wish I had a draft or 2 as some more fodder. So I'll come up. I think D plus is too low. We've talked about this card already, but I think we really need to give you the podium for a second here, Ben. This is Tithing Blade, 1 and a black for an artifact. When ETBs, each opponent sacks a creature, and then you craft with creature for 4 and a black. Consuming Sepulcher is what it transforms into. This is an artifact. At the beginning of your upkeep, each opponent loses 1 life, and you gain 1 life. I gave this a C. You gave me this a B minus. Talk to me, baby.
I love this card. This is my top black common, which it is probably not
That
the
is
best black
the
common, but
flaming of hottest takes.
it is the best black common in my heart. This card is either going, I think it is not going to be bad. It's either going to be you're fine playing it, or it's going to be very good. I'm hoping it's going to be very good.
Because like in theory, this could just be like you get a couple of these. This is like your win con.
This
and
is your plan.
deck.
Yes,
Yeah.
it is a deck's plan.
Yeah.
At common, which I think is what is so appealing to me about it. But aside from the backside, just at face value, if you manage to stick Tithing Blade, where you like do this, your opponent sacrifices a creature, then you have this rectangle on the battlefield for crafting, for sacrifice fodder in your white-black deck. It's gonna, when it goes to the graveyard, put a permanent in your graveyard for descend. Like much like some of those other cards, I just think, especially the blue one that had craft to turn into the 6/6, I just think this card is at the intersection of a lot of what the format is asking of you, as well as potentially just being an intrinsically strong Magic card itself, depending on where the board state is at.
Like the drain one, people will remember Ill-Gotten Gains or whatever, Ill-Gotten Inheritance, I believe is what it was called, from Ravnica Allegiance. This effect is a lot more power. If you have any kind of board presence, this drain one effect is actually very hard to overcome.
Yeah. Well, and imagine like if you're picking Tithing Blade highly and you have a few of them, oof. I am.
What do you mean
really,
imagine? That is what you'll be doing.
That's what I'll be doing. I don't know if other people will be doing it or not. And
I wanted to grade this highly too. I really did. I was trying to just like trying to temper the floor of like we don't play edict effects in limited. We don't do it.
The royal we.
The advice that you would hope to receive from a podcast such as ours would be do not play 1 and a black sorcery speed edict in limited.
Yes.
So that is like you have to wrap your head around that part of the card. You would also never play the backside. You would never just play whatever 4 mana, 5 mana, drain 1.
But combined by our powers
Yes.
combined, as Captain Planet would say, I think it is a great Magic the Gathering card. But also, I mean, this is not real justification. This is justification in my head. The more of them, the more aggressively you pick it, the more edict effects you have, the better your edict effects are going to get.
Correct. Yeah, I agree. Like, but that is the thing where yes, these do get better in multiples, and they are a game plan. I'm just really trying to temper your excitement with the realities of this card because I think you and I are both pretty high on it. I actually don't think it made my top black commons, but I like it a lot. I just want to temper it with like the floor of this card is low.
Floor of a card's low, but the ceiling is super high. And like the game planness of it
Uh
is
huh.
so enticing. Oof, I love Tithing Blade.
All right, next up, I am prepared to be very wrong about this. It's Bitter Triumph, 1 and a black for an instant. As an additional cost to cast the spell, discard a card or pay 3 life. Destroy target creature or planeswalker. I gave this a C plus. You gave this a B, and I could be too low on this, but this is a real cost, and the fact that it's not or it's 5 mana, which is often what we see. Like you are either discarding a card or paying 3 life. Now you can think about the discard a card as upside potentially. Pitch a land, get to descend 4. Like it's not all strictly downside here, but it's a cost.
Yeah, I still think it's too efficient to
Too
not
efficient.
be a great card.
Yeah. I'm gonna stick at C plus for now, but that's probably B minus B.
Next, we've got Canonized in Blood. 1 and a black for an enchantment. At the beginning of your end step, if you descended this turn, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. You can pay 7, sack it to make a 4/3 flying vampire demon. You gave us an F. I gave this a D. This card is not great. I don't think it's a hard F, though. I think this card is playable in white-black.
Yeah, I think 1 and a black enchantment at the beginning of your end step. Let's say there's no work. 1 and a black at the beginning of your end step, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. I don't even think that card's that good.
I agree.
And so you have to work for this, and then the 7 mana sack to get a 4/3 flyer. I don't care about that. Like, I just think this card is terrible, and you should never put it in your deck.
I agree it's not very good.
You look so sheepish right now.
I mean, it's not a great card.
Yeah.
I don't love being on the side of defending this card.
Yeah. Well, sorry.
So the next couple cards of these, I think we don't necessarily have grade differences on, but could be tricky to evaluate. So I think we want to dive into why they are good. The first one of these is Visage of Dread, 1 and a black for an artifact. When it ETBs, target opponent reveals their hand. You choose an artifact or a creature card from it. That player discards that card, and then it crafts with 2 creatures for 5 and a black to turn into a 5/4 with menace. That whenever it enters the battlefield or attacks, you may mill 2 cards. You give us a B minus. I gave this a B. This is the craft thing of this is just an excellent 2-for-1, right?
Yeah. Yeah, like you wouldn't play the front side of this on its own. But the front side of this is very likely, especially in this set where people are going to be slanted. A lot of these, a lot of the instant and sorcery effects we usually get are tacked on to artifacts with craft anyway. So that count is a little higher. So this is going to nab something unless they're hellbent or nearly hellbent. And then, yeah, crafted 2 creatures, pay 6. That's a cost for sure. Like you got to do some work to get those 2 creatures in the bin, and you definitely don't want to remove them from the battlefield or whatever. But like what you get is so good.
It's so good.
That's where I think that's why I'm thinking about these, or that's why I was recalling the transforming sagas from Neon Dynasty. Was like it's a delay, it's a cost, but what you get is so good. If you just think about every step of the way, is what I'm getting worth it? And I think it really is. And again, craft begets craft. That's another thing we haven't really talked about. Is like the more of the higher you are on these, then the more flexible you are. Of like, oh, I actually don't need the 5/4 now. What I really want is to drain with my edict artifact. So I'm going to actually sacrifice Visage of the Dread rather than like, right, the things existing let you have more opportunities to transform them. So I do think like they turn into a sort of greater than the sum of their parts style deck.
Absolutely. Next one of these is Grasping Shadows. This is 3 and a black for an enchantment. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gains Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. Put a Dread counter on Grasping Shadows. Then if there are 3 or more Dread counters on it, transform it. It transforms into a cave, Shadow's Lair, which can tap for a black, or you can pay black, tap it, remove a Dread counter from Shadow's Lair, you draw a card, and you lose a life. This card is incredible. I was kind of sad that you were high on this card
Me, that's
because
how
I
I
really wanted to
feel.
talk about it.
When I saw that you highlighted it and we had the same grade, I was like, oh, I bet he graded it lower, then saw my grade, and then he really thought about it. He was like, oh, Ethan's right. But no, you just came to the right conclusion. So here's why this card is great. And I want to compare it to, there's a card that we didn't talk about that both of us gave an F in white called Might of the Ancestors. It's an enchantment that says at the beginning of combat on your turn, you can choose a creature to get +2/+0 in vigilance until end of turn. I was just like, this card's terrible. Like, it needs creatures to be good. It's only good if you have attacks or whatever. Like, cards like that, I just don't want to put in my deck. Grasping Shadows seems like it's similar, right? It's like, well, you only get to start the snowball thing if you have attacks. But Death Touch and Lifelink solve a lot of the problems that I have with only attacks, right? Because you can just, whatever. Okay, I don't really want to, I want my blockers back. I'm just going to send this little 1/1 or whatever. And that's fine because it'll have attacks. Or lifelink means you can decide to start trading or racing. I mean, like you can just be like, now my 4/4 has death touch and lifelink. What are you going to do? Like,
Yeah, are you
yeah,
gonna
I don't
trade
have.
with it and then like deal with my 3/3 with Death Touch and Lifelink the next turn? It's impossible to race.
And
And then after
then,
you get done putting your opponent in a position where they can't possibly race you, you have 3 cards locked and loaded once you're
mhm,
stable from the Lifelink.
and you've ramped yourself. So,
And
yeah.
you've ramped yourself. Yeah,
Yeah.
card's incredible.
Grasping Shadows is awesome. All right, that takes us on to red. Sunfire Torch is up first. This is single red for an artifact equipment. Equip cost is 1. And it says equipped creature gets +1/+0 and has whenever this creature attacks, you may sacrifice Sunfire Torch. When you do, this creature deals 2 damage to any target. I gave this a D. You gave this a C-.
Yeah, I think this card has a lot of small things going on for it. You have shock in artifact form, which is kind of upside in this format. I mean, it's a little more expensive, but this is going to give you some removal that is also going to trigger your artifact ETBs. In a red white deck, this is also giving you an artifact that you can tap to pump up your things that want you to tap artifacts to, give extra bonuses. I think this has enough small things going on that I could see myself playing it.
Yeah, again, I don't think a D doesn't mean I don't see myself playing it. I just don't think I'll ever be done with a draft and be missing it, but it's
Yeah,
possible.
you're probably right. D plus.
Yeah.
Next up, we've got Hotfoot Gnome. This is 2 in a red for a 3/1 with haste, and you can tap to give another target creature haste until end of turn. You give us a D plus. I gave this a C. I think this card is going to be scary to play against. It itself having haste as a 3-powered thing is pretty nice. And
Mhm.
threat of activation on future turns. I really like this card.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's got good types. It's an artifact itself.
There's not a lot of X1 punishing things. I mean, there's going to be tokens running around, but I think this does enough that you're interested in it.
Yeah, I'll come as a C-. I think this is above replacement.
All right, next, we've got your boy, Dowsing Device. This is 1 in red for an artifact. When this or another artifact enters the battlefield under your control, up to 1 target creature you control gets +1/+0 and gains haste until end of turn. And then you can transform Dowsing Device if you control 4 or more artifacts. It flips into Geode Grotto, which is a cave that taps for red. Or you can pay 2 in a red, tap until end of turn. Target creature gains haste and gets +X/+0, where X is the number of artifacts you control. Activate only as a sorcery. You give us a build around B. I give us a synergy C.
Okay, I think I'm prepared for arguing up on this card. So, a card that maybe you and I were higher on than most people, but I think we can agree was clunkier than it looked, was Dragon Spark Reactor in Neon Dynasty. So this was a 1 in a red artifact. Whenever an artifact entered the battlefield under your control, you put a counter on it, and you can pay 4, tap, sacrifice it to deal damage to any target equal to the number of counters on it. But had terrible stats, even in aggressive red decks in Neon Dynasty. And I think part of that awkwardness was those aggro decks wanted to affect the board on turn 2, but for Dragonspark Reactor to be good, you had to play it on turn 2. And so there's this tension here. Dowsing Device makes up for that tension because it grants haste to the creatures, right? So playing a 2-drop on turn 2 versus playing this on turn 2, then playing your 2-drop on turn 3 to get the +1/+0 in haste, a very similar thing. And in fact, you're getting a slight bonus of being able to have that +1/+0 attack or whatever. You do the reverse, play your 2-drop. This comes into play. It grants the +1/+0 somewhere. It's going to be pretty trivially easy then in an artifact deck to flip this. And once you flip this, this is an incredible mana sink.
That's what I was going to ask. Like, are you that excited about flipping it? Because I'm more
Yes.
excited about the front half than I am the back half.
I think the back half, I mean, it's not quite like Kessig Wolf Run, which is like +X/+0 and trample. Like, it doesn't quite do that, but pretty big deal to just be like, my 1/1 is of this now. My flying whatever is huge now. Like, I don't know. I think this card's really, really powerful.
Well, so here are my thoughts, and I do hear everything you're saying. Like, I can see the upside for sure. And I think this card's best case scenario is coming down on turn 2 and then giving some subsequent artifact creatures haste
Mhm.
when they enter the battlefield. Are you really excited about spending your whole turn to like give an artifact creature +4/+0 or +3/+0 or something? Like when craft is in the format, I just think there are so many places to put mana in the format.
Well, then great.
Like,
This ramped you. This is a land now.
yeah, sure. I mean, fine if it's a land, and I guess it's upside having the other text. I wish this had the option to remain dowsing device because I think
Uh-huh.
this is going to flip pretty quickly, and I think there's going to be a lot of times you're sad about it flipping.
Yeah, maybe. Maybe that's true. I don't know. I just think like this slots on in the early turns of the curve really nicely, either on 2, 3, or 4. And then yeah, you're right. You only get the bonus a couple times before this flips if you're building your deck right. But then I think that's where evaluations are different, is that I'm seeing the backside is all upside. Either it's ramping you to your expensive craft stuff, or it's like, yeah, I also am turning all of my tiny threats into, huge chunks of damage potentially.
Right. I think this card is going to be as good as Geode Grotto is, and that's the question mark for me. All right, that takes us on to green commons. Where first up, we've got Staggering Size. 1 on a green for an instant. Target creature gets +3/+3 and gains trample until end of turn. You give us a D+. I give us a C. I've got one word for you, Ethan. Dinosaurs.
Yeah,
They're big, and they
they're
want
big.
trample, and they want to get bigger. I think this card's good.
Yeah, I don't know. I hear what you're saying. I never rate the 2 mana green tricks highly. Like
But
Titanic Growth.
+3/+3 and trample is
I know.
so much.
I know. Does this get diminishing returns at all, or is it just good in dinos?
I think it's just good and beat down dinos, yeah.
All right, I'll go
Like
center. I'll go center.
I would argue that this is better than the stupid fight spell in dinos.
I think that's true. I don't think, yeah,
Then
that's not an
then this
argument
has
I
got
need.
to be a good C, right?
Yeah. All right, I'm into it. After that, we have Castlum's Stone Tree. This is 2 and a green for an artifact. And there's the battlefield. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. What?
I'm just ready to make some confessions after you're done with this card.
Okay. This is 2 and a green for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a land card from among them onto the battlefield tapped. Put the rest onto the bottom in a random order. Craft with Cave for 5 and a green. Turns into a 5/5. I gave this is my lowest graded, I think, craft card. I gave this a D+. You gave this a C+.
C+ is my revised grade for this card.
What?
And initially, I gave this card a B on my first pass through, and then I saw your D+, and I thought about it a little more. This was also initially my top green common, and then I was like, probably not.
Wow. Yeah, this is I almost want to say the B word. Like
No.
3 mana for what was it? Vociferous Vine Wall or whatever. The like O2. Looked at the top 6 and found a gate. So you look at the top 6, goes into play, great. But this isn't like fixing or whatever. It's ramp.
Kind of, if you try hard enough.
And then 6, it doesn't put the cards in the graveyard. Then its craft is 6 mana for a 5/5, and you have to craft a cave.
You have to craft caves. There'll be caves in your graveyard that
This
you'll
card doesn't
sacrifice to
matter.
discover
This is
with.
not a good card.
I really like it.
I think this
I
card
don't.
is. I think this
I
card's
don't.
bad.
I don't think it's bad. I think you're gonna be happily playing this in a caves deck. The three mana ramp is not a good card. 3 mana ramp, leave an artifact on the battlefield. So the comparison I had in my head, which is not really a let me ask you this because I don't think it's right, but the reason I was so high on this card initially is I think this card's kind of close to Beanstalk Giant from Eldraine. Like assuming you don't whiff on the land, you get 3 mana ramp yourself, and then later you get 6 mana for a 5/5. Now it's not like 7 mana for a 7/7, but it's similar-ish to that. That's not selling you at all. You're giving me
I'm
deep
very.
eyebrow. You're
If
giving
it
me
was
furrowed eyebrows
if it
here.
was craft with land, I'd be all about it. I'm not into craft with cave.
Right. You have to play in a Caves deck. That's why it's not the best green common. That's why it's a little lower. But I think in the Caves deck, it is close to that power level of card. But that deck already has plenty of power and just needs to not
Not
die. That's
die
my
with a
only.
3 mana
That's my
0/0. Yeah.
yeah. That's my only worry.
Nah,
So yeah. But I think this card is going to get played and going to have a home in Caves decks.
wait, going to get played is
I told you I pulled my grades way back.
this card will be legal in LCI Limited. That's true. That's true.
All right, that takes us on to the green uncommons. First up, we've got Glowcap Lantern. This is green for an equipment. It's got an equip cost of 2. Equipped creature has, you may look at the top card of your library at any time, and whenever it attacks, it explores. You give us a C minus, I give us a D.
Yeah, my initial thought was D, but then I was trying to think if there was any way to gain benefit from the knowledge. Like if you have other explore stuff, is it nice to know? Like once you equip it, you could decide not to attack, right? Like if you feel like you need the +1/+1 counter or not. I mean, obviously, let's say if you have attacks with the creature you equip this to, it's great. And it's not like a high praise for a card, right? Having attacks. But like either getting a +1/+1 counter and the surveil is good, or drawing a land is also great. And then there's potential for I've got choices in my hand of what I can do. Am I going to explore or not? Oh, I know what the top card of my library is. It's not a land. I won't explore this turn. I'll do, like I realize like you're laughing at me like I'm insane or whatever, but
Well, I've got to let me ask you this locked and loaded, which is did you not give Curiosity a D minus in the last format? Like, this is worse than Curiosity.
no, it isn't.
Yes.
No, it isn't. Because this doesn't actually have to connect.
But if your
And
creature
this
has
can
a
pump your creature. Don't give me the Curiosity also is mostly bad. Like, I'm not saying that this is a good card. I was just trying to see if there were, because I was like, initially, this is an equipment that doesn't add power or toughness and requires an attack. This card stinks. That was my initial thought. I was just trying to see if there was more this card had to offer.
I think no was the answer to that for me.
Okay.
I think I'm hoping to not play this card. Next up, we've got Tendril of the Myco Tyrant. This is 1 and a green for a 2/2 fungus wizard, and you can pay 7 to put 7 +1/+1 counters on target non-creature land you control. Becomes a 0/0 fungus creature with haste. It's still a land. You give us a C minus, I give us a B minus. This is mana sink with a capital M.
This is Grizzly Bears like 90% of the time.
But that 10% it's
95%
not.
of the time.
That 10% is not. It's going to be a problem. It's not a B minus.
This doesn't
probably.
pull you into green
I
at
agree.
all. This is it was everything in my power to not give this a D or a D plus.
It's better than a bear. It's a
not
C
better
plus,
than a
a
bear.
C. A C is as low as I will go on this card. It's not a B minus. I agree. I concede that. Does not pull you into green.
Yeah. I'm going C minus still on Tendril. I don't think it's that good.
All right, that takes us on to artifacts. We've got one common here to argue about, Buried Treasure. This is 2 for an artifact. Treasure, you can tap, sack it to add 1 mana of any color, and you can pay 5 to exile it from your graveyard to discover 5. You give us an F, I give us a synergy D+.
What is the synergy with losing?
Wow, got him. No, I think like there's a lot of cards that mill, there's cards that let you loot, there's cards that let you rummage. Like you're trying to pitch this, and then you have a resource in your graveyard to discover 5 with, or you play this and it's a thing on the battlefield, and then you sacrifice it and you discover 5 from your graveyard. This is sacrifice fodder or mill fodder or rummage fodder. So I think if you have enough of those effects in your deck, you're interested in Buried Treasure. Again, this is like another glue piece that kind of is at the intersection of everything that the format is asking you to do with your cards.
Your sell on this card is that ideally this never hits the battlefield or my hand, basically.
Or hits the battlefield and is sacrificed, or hits your hand and is rummaged away. I think there are ways to, like, you're fine if you sack it. It's great sack fodder.
You just don't need to play cards that are not cards to do that. You have plenty of other things. Mister, you're never going to run out of stuff to do in this format. Yeah, because you're not putting stuff that 2-for-1s you, like Buried Treasure, in your deck. This card's abysmal.
It doesn't 2-for-1 you. I disagree that this card is abysmal.
This is do nothing. Then later on, you can pay 5 mana to get a random 2-drop from your deck. This card is bad. You're never playing this.
I think I will.
You're
I will.
never playing this.
Really?
Yeah, never. This card's bad.
Hmm. I, I don't mind it. I don't like it.
I don't. I
I'm
don't.
not. I'm not offended if it ends up in my deck. If I think I'll be able to get it to the
I
graveyard.
just love your line reading there was like it's only ever been nice to me. Like I don't see what the problem is.
Well, that's because I feel like you're so actively hateful of it.
Yeah. You're like, look, it's Buried Treasures never said anything but kind things about our podcast. Next up is I can't believe I'm lower on this than you. This is Scampering Surveyor. It's 4 mana for a 3/2 artifact creature. It's Skittering Surveyor's uncle or whatever. It's a 3/2, enters the battlefield, search your library for a basic land or cave card, put it onto the battlefield, tapped, then shuffle. I gave this a C, you gave this a B.
This card is incredible, isn't it?
It costs 4 mana.
4 mana for a 3/2 that searches up a cave. Like, this is going to be bread and butter enabler for the caves deck. This is going to enable splashes for you. It's a 2-for-1. It's a relevant body for 4 mana plus a ramp plus a search for a basic. I think this card is outstanding.
Yeah, this is probably closer to Solemn Simulacrum than I'm giving it credit for. I'll come up to B minus. This is a 4-drop I can make room for in my deck.
All right, we got a couple uncommon lands to duke it out about here.
We already talked about Pit last week. You want me to tell you it's an F again?
I do. This card has gone up for me.
Oh my god!
After seeing
you're out of control.
You gave us an F. I gave us a C plus. Pit of Offerings is a land cave. ETB is tapped. Whenever it enters the battlefield, exile up to 3 target cards from graveyards. Tap, add a colorless, or tap, add 1 mana of any of the exiled cards' colors. You mean to tell me after seeing how good Descend is, how important caves look to the caves deck, this card, you are never cutting this from the caves deck. I think that's probably where it's only getting played, but you're never cutting it from there.
Ben, this is ETB tapped wastes. This is ETB tapped wastes unless it's like turn 5.
Sure, that's your play.
That's horrible. You cannot tell people to put that in their decks.
I can when there's build-arounds like deal X damage to creatures where X is the number of caves you control.
This card is a mega bad.
Here's
what's going to happen. You are going to put this in your deck. You're going to look at an opening hand and you're going to have to mulligan because of this card. And that's when I'm going to get the Discord message that says, you were right about Pit of Offerings.
I don't think you're getting that message. I really don't.
Okay.
I'm
not budging on Pit of Offerings here.
Firm convictions on Pit of Offerings.
Nor am I budging on Volatile Fault, but I don't think this is a full-on F. This is a uncommon cave. It taps for colorless, and you can pay 1 tap, sacrifice it, destroy a target non-basic land an opponent controls. That player may search their library for a basic land card, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. You create a treasure token. I gave this a sideboard thinking about the rare creature lands. You gave this a D+. I mean, I can see D+ in caves.
Yeah, I think sometimes you're going to have to run this as a waste in caves.
Mm-hmm.
But I not to beat a dead horse. I like Pit of Offerings better than this because it could give you colors and it takes your opponent off Descend.
I really appreciate the optimist that you are in preview season. I really do. It balances us out nicely. You're just really going mana bases are always great and limited and never difficult to enable. And we already talked about how there really isn't fixing in the format. So if there was Brave the Wilds or Return the Wilds and Evolving Wilds, do I think you could get away with a couple colorless or potentially colorless lands? Sure, maybe. I don't think you have that luxury here, buddy.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, I'm not happy about Volatile Fault. I am happy about Pit of Offerings. But this is, I think the number of cards that we feel passionately about that we're different on is a boon for the format. I think this format is deep. I think it's going to be cool.
I agree. Well,
I think there's also a bit of tension here, and I think we'll be more harmonious in the top commons. I think we should proceed that direction.
Okay, deep breath.
Just a little cleansing.
Let's cleanse the palate here with some top commons and uncommons. I'm going to start us off here with the white commons. I'll go first. My number 1 is Iron Paw Aspirant. 1 and a white for a 1/2. When it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. A pushed version with an extra bit of toughness there of a card that I am always too high on. Number 2, we've got Flying Rabblemaster Oltec Cloud Guard, 3 and white for a 3/2 flyer. When ETBs, create a 1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature token. And my hot take number 3 is the Plane Cycler Soaring Sandwing, 4 white for a 3/5 flyer. When ETBs, you gain 3 life, and it has plane cycling for 2.
Yeah, we're fairly different on the white commons. I think largely because white's commons are not great. Like, it was tough to find 3 good ones. White looks by far the weakest to me at common coming
Wow.
out of the gate in spoiler season. Number 1, I'm sure this isn't going to end up being number 1, but this was just lack of feeling passionately about any of white's commons. I put Petrify in the number 1 slot, 1 in a white aura, enchant artifact or creature. Enchant a permanent can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. In the number 2 slot, I've got Oltec Cloud Guard, the 3/2 flyer that brings a 1/1 token along with it. And then in the number 3 slot, my synergy hot take here, Tinker's Tote, 2 and a white for an artifact. When ETBs, create 2/1/1 colorless gnome artifact creature tokens, and you can pay white, sacrifice this to gain 3 life. I don't
3
believe super strongly in Tinker's Tote, but again, didn't feel very passionately about any of white's commons.
3 rectangles is hard to ignore. I want to chat just quickly about why Petrify is not in my top 3 white commons. And I think we can maybe take a little bit of a clue that Petrify is basically just Arrest, which is a card we've seen in the past at 3 mana, a card we've seen in the past at uncommon. This is a 2 mana common. And I think it's largely because Sacrifice and Craft exist. And I think that's a real knock against the aura-based removal spell.
I agree. I don't think Petrify is going to be good, but like I said, I am lost looking at white commons. I wanted to just leave it blank.
Wow. I don't feel that way about white, actually, but we'll have to see. Moving on to the uncommons, I have Spring-Loaded Saw Blades at number 1. That's 1 and a white for a flash artifact. Deals 5 damage to target tapped creature when it ETBs. And it has Craft with artifact for 3 and a white. Turns into a 5/5 vehicle with crew 1, or you can crew it by tapping 2 other untapped artifacts you control.
Yeah, card's excellent.
And keeping with the craft theme, in the number 2 slot, I have Clay-Fired Bricks, 1 and a white for an artifact. When it ETBs, you search your library for a plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle. You gain 2. Craft with artifact for 5 white, flips into Cosmium Kiln, which makes 2 1/1s, and creatures you control get +1/+1.
Yeah, that card is excellent. Love a Clay-Fired Bricks. I've got the same number 1 in Spring-Loaded Saw Blades. My number 2, I'm looking for caves. I've got Bat Colony in the number 2 slot, 2 and a white enchantment. ETBs, make a 1/1 black bat creature token with flying. For each mana from a cave spent to cast it, and whenever a cave enters the battlefield under your control, you get to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control.
Yeah, I'm very excited about that. That is definitely the cave payoff I am most looking forward to abusing.
All right, moving on to the blue commons. My number 1 is Inverted Iceberg. 1 and a blue for an artifact. ETBs, mill a card, draw a card. Then you can craft with artifact for 4 blue to get a 6/6 that whenever it attacks, you can tap or untap target artifact or creature. My number 2, I've got Water Wind Scout. 2 and a blue for a 2/2 with flying. When it ETBs, make a map token. That probably should be number 1, but I really like Inverted Iceberg. Wanted to stake a claim. And in the number 3 slot, I've got River Herald Scout, 1 and a blue for a 1/2. When it ETBs, it explores.
River Herald Scout, I can't believe, that was an uncommon in black in original Ixalan, and now it's a common. Card is good. I have
good.
the same 3, just in a different order. I have the Flying Map Maker in 1. I have the 1/2 Explorer in 2, and then I have Inverted Iceberg as my number 3.
All right, moving on to the blue uncommons. Number 1, I've got Spyglass Siren. Single blue for the 1/1 flyer, and when it ETBs, you create a map token. And in the number 2 slot, I've got Zoetic Glyph. 2 and a blue for an aura. Enchant artifact. Enchanted artifact's a golem. Creature with base power and toughness 5/4 in addition to its other types. And when this is put into a graveyard from the battlefield, you discover 3.
Yeah, just like Mightstone's animation on steroids a little bit. Yeah, I have Spyglass Siren as my number 1 as well, and my number 2 is Waterlogged Hulk. That was the artifact we talked about that tap to mill, craft with island, turns into the 4/4 Vigi vehicle.
I like that take.
Looking at black, my number 1 is Skullcap Snail. 1 and a black for a 1/1. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent exiles a card from their hand. I have Deadweight at number 2, single black for the aura. Enchanted creature gets -2/-2. I think this card is always good. Just cannot be understated that this not only kills a thing, but then triggers Descend for you, and then adds 2 Descend 4, Descend 8, super synergistic. And I'm actually not happy with it. I just put it here at number 3. I don't think this is going to be that good. I think Black has better commons than this. Just couldn't pick one. But I put Join the Dead at number 3, one black instant. Target creature gets -5/-5 until end of turn, or if you have Descend 4, they get -10/-10 instead.
I made the brave call to leave Join the Dead out of
Yeah,
my top commons, and instead I've got Tithing Blade in there. So my number one is Tithing Blade, which is I
it's
don't know.
hot. It's
It's
scalding hot, but it's good.
it's scalding hot. It's where my heart wants to go, and I'm following my heart early on in the format until I'm proven wrong. So Tithing Blade number one, that's the edict effect on an artifact that then flips into an artifact that drains and gains on upkeep. And then number two, I've got the Skullcap Snail. That's the one that makes your opponent discard. And then number three, I've got Dead Weight.
My top uncommons, I've got Chupacabra Echo at number 1. 2 black for a 3/2 with Fathomless Descent. Target creature gets -X/-X until end of turn in this ETBs, where X is the number of permanent cards in your graveyard. And my number 2 is Grasping Shadows. That's the enchantment we talked about. Whenever a creature you control attacks alone, it gets Death Touch and Lifelink until end of turn. Put a dread counter on it. Then when there are 3 or more dread counters, you transform it into a land that has the ability black, tap, remove a dread counter from it. You draw a card and you lose a life.
Yeah, I've got those same two in the same order. Honestly, wouldn't shock me though if Grasping Shadows were the best.
I agree. I think Grasping Shadow is going to be awesome.
Moving on to red commons. In the number one slot, I've got Abrade by a landslide, deal 3 to a creature or destroy target artifact. In the number 2 slot, I've got Volatile Wanderglyph. This is 1 in red for a 2/2. Whenever it becomes tapped, you may discard a card. If you do, draw a card. And then in the number 3 slot, I've got Plundering Pirate, 2 in a red for a 3/2. ETBs create a treasure token.
I have the same 3. I just swapped 2 and 3. So I have the 3/2 make a treasure at 2 and Volatile Wanderglyph at 3.
All right, moving on to red uncommons. Number 1 slot, Geological Appraiser. 2 red for the 3/2. When it ETBs, if you cast it, discover 3. That card looks incredible. And continuing with my love of caves, the number 2 slot, I've got Calamitous Cave-In. 3 in a red for a sorcery, deals X to each creature in each planeswalker, where X is the number of caves you control and are in your graveyard.
My number 2, remember I was talking about, man, the Tormenting Voice variant in this format's going to be nuts. Well, they just decided, yeah, it has to be nuts anyway, so we'll make it even more nuts. This is Saheeli's Lattice. 1 in a red for an artifact. When it enters the battlefield, you may discard a card. If you do, draw 2 cards. And then it has Craft with 1 or more dinosaurs for 4 in a red. Flips into a star 4. Its power is equal to the total power of the exiled cards used to craft it. Not even that excited about like dinosaurs, whatever. But like just this is Tormenting Voice that then is craft fodder, I think is great.
Yeah, card's very strong. Moving on to green commons. In the number 1 slot, I've got Nurturing Bristleback, 5GG for a 5/5. When it ETBs, make a 3/3 green dinosaur creature token, and it's got Forest Cycling for 2. Was that, a hot take? I don't think that's that hot of a take.
This would be the number 1 green common. I thought me putting it at number 3 was kind of hot.
Oh, no, I like that card quite a bit. Number 2 slot, I've got River Herald Guide, which might actually be the number 1 common. 2 and a green for 3/1 with Vigilance, and whenever it ETBs, it explores. That card is quite strong. And then in the number 3 slot, I've got Huatli's Final Strike. 2 and a green for an instant. Target creature you control gets +1/+0 until end of turn. Deals damage equal to its power to target creature an opponent controls.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna do a Bill O'Reilly here and change mine live. Number 1, I'm gonna keep
Tribal.
I'm gonna keep Basking Capybara. I like this card. This is 1 on a green for a 1/3, and it has Descend 4. It gets +3/+0 as long as there are 4 or more permanent cards in your graveyard. I'm excited about a 2-drop that scales with the game like this. 2 mana 1/3 is going to be fine, and then this turning into a 2 mana, like a 4/3 in the mid game, I think is going to be pretty sweet. But then I am going to put in number 2, I'm going to put River Herald Guide. That's the 3 mana 3/1 that explores when it ETBs. And then I'm going to I'm going to keep the Forest Cycler at number 3, and I'm getting the Fight Spell out of my top 3.
I like that. I'm not a huge fan of Huatli's Final Strike. That was more in mine as I don't really know what else to do.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to the uncommons. In the number 1 slot, I've got Thrashing Brontodon. This is 1 GG for a 3/4 that you can pay 1 and sacrifice itself to destroy target artifact or enchantment. In the number 2 slot, I've got Cenote Scout. This is green for a 1/1, and whenever it enters the battlefield, it explores.
Yeah, I have the same. I actually have those just flipped. I have the Explorer number 1 and the Dino number 2. So with all of our arguing, 40 minutes of back and forth, we're pretty lined up in our assessment of what things are going to be performing on top, at least initially.
Yeah, I am excited for this format.
I am too. It's interesting, like, Original Ixalan, not a revered set, sort of famous for being blisteringly fast. I think this looks like a blistering amount of value in this set. Like, I'm pretty excited for what looks to be a format where aggro is supported, like red white, red green beats, blue red tempo. Like, those all look like real decks to me. And then I also think there are the tools to combat those decks, and that really makes for a good format.
But and lands that are draftable,
Yeah.
like Cave being its own archetype. Like, I think certainly Tithing Blade could be its own style of deck. Like, there just seems to be a lot of stuff floating around. I'm really excited about Craft. Obviously, if that hasn't come across yet this episode, like,
Yeah.
just seems like a lot of super sweet stuff. And Dinos, I think, is going to be keeping stuff in check too,
Yep.
like keeping everybody honest.
Yeah. No, I agree. Looking forward to it.
All right. Great place to wrap us up. Thank you, as always, to Salty Pretzels for our intro and outro music. Make sure you give it a listen.
Thank you so much to Cool Stuff Inc. for sponsoring this podcast. If you're heading over there for any and all purchases, grabbing those pre-orders of Lost Caverns of Ixalan, whatever you're doing, please use checkout code LOL to let them know we sent you there. And more importantly, to get 5% off of anything you purchase. You can find all of our content on our website. There'll be links to a tier list fresh and ready for you to peruse and criticize. There'll be merch via TeePublic, our Patreon reward tiers, of course, backlog of episodes, links to YouTube and Twitch, all that good stuff at lordsoflimited.com.
If you've got any feedback about the show or any questions, shoot us an email at lordsoflimited@gmail.com.
Thanks so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week for another episode of Lords of Limited.
Thanks, everybody. See you later.